You know what card that I think there's like very little discussion around going on right now that I absolutely personally despise? It's Evenly Matched. Evenly Matched is a card that came out in the 2017 set Circuit Break. Now, for historical context, in general framing and whatnot, this came out after the OG version of Firewall Dragon, the one that basically lets you special summon infinitely. So, kind of the premise of Link summoning being this sort of moderating force in Master Rule 4 as an attempt to slow the game down was basically thrown out the window at this point, although it wasn't made clear until the Nightmares in a couple of sets after this that the idea that the Links would slow down the game would truly be dead as an idea. I'm sure if you're an avid modern Yu-Gi-Oh player that you've had this card resolved on you and you know what it does, but I'll just read it to you anyways. At the end of the battle phase, if your opponent controls more cards than you do, you can make your opponent banish cards from their field face down. They control the same amount of cards as you do. If you control no cards, you can activate this card from your hand. Now, the first thing that I notice about Evenly Matched outside of reading the effect is the fact that it is a trap card. Now, why is this important? Why is it important that Evenly Matched specifically is a trap rather than, say, a quick play spell or a monster hand trap or something like that? Well, because traps are the most obscure of the three major card types in the game. And so if you were to take out Omni Negates and you were just to focus on, specific negation, trap card specific negation is really, really hard to come by. I would say monster negation, so things that can only negate monster effects, is probably at the top of the list. Then spell negation only is second. And then at a distant third is trap negation. So, assuming your opponent just doesn't have something that can negate anything, this is the most likely to resolve. Now, you can definitely say that Evenly Matched is the first of the kind of board breaker style cards that we would get in the years following it. This card came out about 2 years before Dark Ruler No More. And so the intent is that as the going second player, that you play this card and then that evens the odds that your opponent has a giant board state that you can't really play through. So you just use this card to just get rid of all of your opponent's stuff. Now, obviously, the big elephant in the room regarding this card is negation. We'll get to that at a point later, but let's just talk in hypotheticals here. Now, at first glance, this card is really, really interesting and kind of well balanced upon reading it. You sacrifice your battle phase, your literal ability to do damage and win the game, to clear out an opponent's entire board state. So, hey, you can't immediately kill them, but you might wipe away enough of your opponent's resources to kill them on your following turn anyways. However, this sort of analysis of the card I think is really, really shallow and really comes from the perspective of somebody who inherently understands the rules and mechanics of Yu-Gi-Oh, yet does not understand how a modern turn or game of Yu-Gi-Oh actually works. The most charitable interpretation of Evenly Matched that you can give is that Evenly Matched is meant to punish overextension. That if your opponent commits way too much to the board so that they have no follow-up, you activate Evenly Matched, you get rid of all their resources, and then they have no ability to follow up once you actually start building up your board. So, okay, the Evenly Matched itself might not be as profitable if you don't commit as much, but you could still come back further. Now, what's inherently wrong with that sort of overextension punishment premise is that, well, modern Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't even work like that at all. At least in current year 2023 Yu-Gi-Oh, and it definitely was true when this card originally came out, the way that you build your resources is by building your board. That a resource in your hand and not deciding to use it does not directly translate into a resource that you can use on your next turn. Conserving your resources is kind of a weird premise because, one thing in your hand doesn't necessarily mean, one way that you can interact with your opponent in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Usually one thing is sort of a building block to something else that is going to interact with your opponent. I mean, you can make that argument for like GOAT format or Speed Duel or Edison that one card in your hand is a resource. But I mean, would you say that Firewall Defensor in your hand is a like resource in the same way that like a Torrential Tribute or a Wall of Disruption is? All right, great example of a deck to use in this scenario. Branded Despia. Branded Despia is probably one of my favorite competitive decks ever. It's not just building a bazillion Omni Negates. It's a lot of different kinds of disruption and interaction and whatnot. You really have to cleverly play through what your opponent puts up, and it's not just stopping your opponent from what they're doing. So let's just put aside again negation for a second, and also finding a sweet spot between the right amount of stuff that can interact with the opponent and stop them from winning the game on you if they don't activate evenly, but won't be that bad to lose to an evenly, is actually, like, I think near impossible to do, at least for someone of my skill level, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Is weird in that, like, every deck is different, how you accumulate resources is different, and, like, one single interaction can win you the game sometimes, and so when you have all these different hands that you have to figure out, and you're thinking about what your opponent might have in your hand, and, you know, sequencing and ordering things and whatnot, that it's actually, like, really, really difficult to figure out what enough is sometimes. You know what I mean? And this leads to, I think, probably the stupidest dynamic in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is the sort of overextension versus underextension lose-lose scenario, as I like to call it. Again, not factoring negation into this, right? Let's say that you build a board, you overextend. You know, your opponent, turn 2, activates evenly matched on you. Oh no, you lose because you committed too many resources on the board. So next time, you're like, okay, if I think my opponent has evenly, I'm just going to undercommit so that way they don't get as probable of an evenly matched. Okay, that's great. But the problem is that your opponent could just decide to not activate the evenly matched, just play the game, and you don't have enough interruptions for them, and so they can basically win off of you being afraid of the evenly matched. And I feel like that second scenario where your opponent just decides to kill you instead of activating their evenly match because you undercommitted gets worse and worse and worse as the game keeps getting more and more and more one-card starters, where you could have a dead evenly matched in your hand or just decide not to use it and still get full combo that can kill your opponent. And why I think it's important that we talk about evenly matched in this hypothetical no negation scenario is that a lot of the best end boards in the game, as Konami keeps shifting away from these like crazy omni-negate type decks with things like Branded and Kashtira going forward, is that this problem is only going to get worse. That evenly matched resolving is going to be devastating, and then doing the inverse is going to cause your opponent to win. But okay, what about negation? What about negation, you might ask, right? That a lot of evenly matched defenders will say, well, it's obviously there to just eat a negate. It's not actually meant to do anything sometimes. That it's just meant to fetch out negation so that way you can try the next immediate thing that you want to. Now, I will say that evenly matched does have a really strong effect, but I feel like this argument of negate bait really isn't that strong or unique of a quality that evenly matched has. I feel like there's a bazillion other cards that do kind of similar things, maybe not as strong as evenly matched, that I can use as negate bait to force a response out of my opponent, which also can include other cards in Engine that I don't care about as much that I think my opponent might want to negate. I don't know if my particular take is really spicy or anything like that. I know some pro players like Joshua Schmidt say that they hate the card, but it's a necessary evil to sort of force out negation and to get rid of all these crazy going first boards that even if there is no negation, that it's really, really hard to play through. So anyways, guys, that's it for the video. If you like this topic, just this little card discussion, I might be willing to do more. So like this video, comment, subscribe if you want to see more, and have a good day.